The baby in her arms had stopped crying an hour ago, and that terrified her more than the blizzard. Mara Lindell staggered through waist-deep Kansas snow, her dead outlaw husband's name still painted on wanted posters across 3 territories, her 10-day-old son turning blue against her chest. The town had driven her out with stones and spit. No food, no shelter, no mercy for the widow of a hanged man. Then, through the whiteout, a single light flickered in the distance. She fell against a rough-hewn door and knocked with frozen knuckles, whispering the only truth she had left. "We got nowhere to go, sir." The door swung open. A grim-faced rancher with shoulders like an ox and eyes full of old ghosts looked down at the dying infant, then stepped aside without a word. "Then you belong here." Before we begin, I want to invite you to stay with us until the very end of this story. And when you do, please comment below with the city you're watching from so I can see just how far Mara and Jonah's journey reaches across the world. The warmth hit Mara like a fist. She stumbled across the threshold, legs buckling, and the man caught her elbow with one rough hand while the other steadied the bundle against her chest. He didn't speak, didn't ask her name, or where she'd come from, or why she was half dead in a blizzard with a newborn in her arms. He just kicked the door shut against the howling wind, guided her toward the iron stove in the corner, and pulled a quilt off the back of a chair. "Sit," he said. His voice was low, flat, scraped raw by disuse. Mara sank onto the wooden bench, her entire body shaking so hard her teeth clattered. The baby, her sweet, silent Eli, lay limp in her arms, his tiny lips cracked and colorless. Panic clawed up her throat. He won't." The man knelt in front of her, his broad frame blocking the stove's heat for a moment as he leaned in. His hands were scarred, calloused, enormous. He peeled back the tattered blanket around Eli's face and pressed 2 fingers gently against the baby's throat. "He's breathing," the man said. "Barely, but he's breathing." Relief broke over Mara in a wave so powerful she nearly sobbed. She clutched Eli tighter, rocking him instinctively, whispering his name over and over like a prayer. The man stood and moved to the stove. He ladled something from a pot, soup maybe, or stew, and poured it into a tin cup. He brought it back and pressed it into her free hand. "Drink," he ordered. She obeyed. The broth was thin, salted, barely warm, but it was the first thing she'd tasted in 2 days that wasn't snow. She drank it in desperate gulps, feeling the heat trickle down into her hollow stomach. The man watched her for a moment, then turned and disappeared through a doorway into what looked like a bedroom. Mara heard the creak of floorboards, the rustle of fabric. When he came back, he carried a thick wool blanket and a bundle of soft cloth. "Get him out of those wet rags," he said, nodding toward Eli. "Wrap him in this." Mara's hands trembled as she unwrapped her son. His clothes, if you could call them that, were soaked through, frozen stiff in places. She peeled them away, her heart breaking at how small he was, how fragile. His skin was mottled, bluish around his fingertips and toes. The man didn't look away. He just knelt again and held the dry cloth open, waiting. Together, silently, carefully, they wrapped Eli in layer after layer of warmth. Mara tucked him against her chest, inside her own coat, skin to skin, and felt the faint flutter of his heartbeat against hers. "He'll need to eat," the man said. "I know," Mara's voice cracked. I don't have much left. I haven't eaten in days, and the milk, it's not—" "There's goat's milk in the cold box," the man interrupted. "I'll warm some." He moved to the back corner of the cabin, where a small wooden crate sat packed with snow. He pulled out a clay jug, poured a cupful into a tin pan, and set it on the edge of the stove. Then he rummaged in a drawer and produced a small cloth, which he twisted into a makeshift nipple. Mara watched him, bewildered. This man, this stranger, moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd done this before, who'd warmed milk for a baby, who'd wrapped a child in blankets and checked for breathing and known exactly what to do when death was standing too close. When the milk was warm, he dipped the cloth into it, squeezed it gently, and held it out to her. "Try this," he said. Mara pressed the cloth to Eli's lips. At first nothing happened. Then his little mouth twitched, and he latched on weakly, sucking in tiny, desperate pulls. Relief flooded through her again, so fierce it made her dizzy. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Don't," the man said quietly. He stood and turned away, staring at the stove. "You don't owe me anything." Mara looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a faded flannel shirt and work trousers held up with suspenders. His hair was dark, streaked with gray at the temples, and his beard was thick and untrimmed. His face was hard, weathered, carved by wind and grief. But his eyes, God, his eyes were the saddest thing she'd ever seen. "What's your name?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. He just kept staring at the stove, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. Finally, he said, Jonah Carver. "I'm Mara Lindell." She hesitated, then added, "This is Eli." Jonah nodded once, sharp and curt, but didn't turn around. Mara fed Eli until the cloth was dry, then dipped it again and again until the baby's color started to return, until his breathing deepened and his tiny fists unclenched. By the time he finally fell asleep against her chest, the storm outside had grown into a full roar, rattling the windows and howling through the cracks in the door. Jonah moved to the window and pulled back the curtain just an inch. Snow poured past in thick, blinding sheets. "You won't be going anywhere tonight," he said. Mara nodded, too exhausted to argue. Jonah let the curtain fall and turned back to her. For a long moment, he just stood there, arms crossed, looking at her like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't want to touch. "You can take the bed," he said finally. "I'll sleep in the barn." "No," Mara protested. "I can't. This is your home. You shouldn't—" "You've got a baby," Jonah interrupted. "You need the warmth. I've slept in worse." Before she could argue further, he grabbed a heavy coat off a peg by the door, shrugged it on, and pulled a wool hat low over his ears. "There's more broth on the stove if you're hungry," he said. "Blankets in the chest by the bed. Don't open the door for anyone but me." And then he was gone, slipping out into the blizzard and pulling the door shut behind him with a solid thunk. Mara sat there in the sudden silence, holding her sleeping son, staring at the closed door. She didn't understand. This man, this Jonah Carver, didn't know her name or her story or the blood on her hands by association. He'd taken one look at a dying baby and let them in without question, without hesitation, without even asking why she was out there in the first place. It didn't make sense. People didn't do that. Not for women like her, not for the widow of an outlaw, not for someone the whole town had called a whore and a traitor, and worse. But Jonah had. Mara looked down at Eli, at his tiny sleeping face, and felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been sealed shut for months, maybe years. Hope. She woke to pale gray light filtering through the window and the smell of coffee. Mara sat up slowly, disoriented. She was in a bed, a real bed, with a mattress and pillows and quilts piled so high she'd been buried in warmth all night. Eli lay beside her, still asleep, his breathing soft and steady. She slipped out of bed carefully, tucking the blankets around him, and padded barefoot across the cold wooden floor. The main room of the cabin was small but solid. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, the stove sat in the corner, and a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs stood in the center. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with jars of preserves, sacks of flour and cornmeal, and a few dented pots and pans. Everything was dusty. Everything was still, except for the coffee. A tin pot sat on the stove, steam curling from the spout. Beside it, a tin cup waited, empty. Mara poured herself a cup and wrapped her hands around it, soaking in the heat. She took a sip, bitter, strong, scalding, and closed her eyes. The door creaked open and Jonah stepped inside, snow clinging to his coat and hat. He stomped his boots on the threshold, shook off the snow, and hung his coat on a peg. "Storm's dying," he said without preamble, "but the drifts are bad. Roads will be closed for days." Mara nodded. "I'm sorry to be a burden." Jonah shot her a look, quick, sharp, unreadable. "You're not a burden." "I don't even know why you let us in," Mara said quietly. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've—" "Don't care," Jonah interrupted. He crossed to the stove and refilled his own cup. Baby was dying. You were dying. That's all I needed to know. Mara stared at him, her throat tight. Most people wouldn't have opened the door. Jonah took a long drink of coffee, then set the cup down with a hard clink. Most people are cowards, he said flatly. He moved to the fireplace and crouched down, feeding logs into the embers, coaxing the fire back to life. Mara watched his hands, steady, deliberate, scarred from years of work. How long have you been out here alone? She asked. Jonah's shoulders stiffened. He didn't turn around. Long enough, he said. Mara bit her lip, regretting the question. She could feel the weight of grief in this place, thick as smoke. It clung to the walls, the furniture, the air itself. From the bedroom, Eli started to fuss, a thin, hungry cry. Mara hurried back to him, lifting him gently and rocking him against her chest. She glanced toward the stove, where the goat's milk still sat in the cold box, and then toward Jonah, who was still crouched by the fire. May I? She started. Help yourself, Jonah said without looking up. Everything here is yours while you need it. Mara's hands trembled as she warmed the milk and fed Eli again. She settled into the rocking chair by the window, another piece of furniture covered in dust, another relic of a life that had stopped, and watched the snow fall outside. Jonah finished with the fire and stood, brushing soot off his hands. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You can stay as long as you need, he said quietly. No questions, no expectations. You stay until you're ready to go. Mara's throat closed up. She nodded, unable to speak. Jonah pulled his coat back on. I'll be in the barn. Holler if you need anything. And then he was gone again, leaving Mara alone with her son and the fire and the quiet, heartbreaking stillness of a house that had forgotten how to be a home. The days blurred together. Jonah worked from dawn until dark, feeding stock, chopping wood, clearing snow, mending fences. He barely spoke. He ate his meals standing up at the stove, refused to sit at the table, and disappeared into the barn every night before the sun set. Mara, in turn, began to move through the cabin like a ghost trying to prove she was real. She swept the floors, scrubbed the dishes, washed the windows, mended the torn curtains, and rehung them properly. She found a crate of old linens in the corner, sheets, pillowcases, dishcloths, and boiled them clean, hanging them to dry by the fire. She didn't ask permission. She just did it. Because she couldn't leave. Not yet. Not with Eli so small and the snow still falling. And she couldn't sit still. Couldn't just take and take and take without giving something back. So she gave what she had. Her hands, her work, her presence. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the cabin began to breathe again. One morning, Mara woke to find a pair of tiny knitted mittens sitting on the table. They were old, faded, the wool thin in places, but they fit Eli's hands perfectly. She looked up to find Jonah watching her from the doorway, his expression carefully blank. Found them in a trunk, he said. Figured he could use them. Mara's eyes burned. Thank you. Jonah nodded once and turned away, heading back out into the cold. Another day, Mara found a wooden cradle in the corner of the barn, half buried under old hay. She dragged it inside, scrubbed it clean, and lined it with soft blankets. That night, when Jonah came in for supper, he stopped short at the sight of Eli sleeping peacefully in the cradle by the fire. He didn't say anything. He just stood there for a long moment, staring at the baby, his jaw tight. Then he turned and walked back out into the night. Mara watched him go, her heart aching. She didn't know what ghosts lived in Jonah Carver's heart. She didn't know what he'd lost, or why he lived out here alone in this silent, frozen house. But she knew grief when she saw it, and she knew that sometimes the only way to survive it was to keep moving, keep working, keep breathing, even when it felt impossible. 2 weeks after Mara arrived, the snow finally stopped. She stood at the window, holding Eli, and watched the sun break through the clouds for the first time in days. The prairie stretched out white and endless, glittering like diamonds under the pale blue sky. Jonah came in from the barn, stomping snow off his boots. Roads will be clear in a few days, he said. Mara nodded, her chest tight. I'll start packing, Jonah frowned. Didn't say you had to leave. I can't stay here forever. Mara said quietly. I've already taken too much from you. You haven't taken anything, Jonah said, his voice sharp. He crossed his arms, his jaw set. You've worked yourself half to death trying to pay me back for something I never asked for. Mara turned to face him, Eli still in her arms. Why did you let us in, Jonah? Really? Why? Jonah looked at her for a long moment, his eyes dark and haunted. Because no one let me in, he said finally, when I needed it most, and I won't be that person for someone else. Mara's breath caught. Jonah turned away, his shoulders tight. Stay as long as you need, Mara. I mean it. This place is big enough for all of us. He grabbed his coat and hat and headed back out into the cold, leaving Mara standing by the window, tears streaming down her face, holding her son and feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Safe. For the first time since her husband was hanged, since the town turned on her, since she'd been driven out into the snow with nothing but a baby and a prayer. She felt safe, and she didn't know what to do with that. That night, after Eli was asleep and the fire was banked low, Mara found herself unable to settle. She paced the cabin, restless, her mind spinning. She kept replaying Jonah's words over and over. No one let me in when I needed it most. What had happened to him? She moved to the mantel, where a few small objects sat gathering dust. A carved wooden horse, a tin cup with flowers painted on the side, and a small faded photograph in a cracked frame. Mara picked up the photograph carefully, tilting it toward the firelight. A woman stared back at her, young, pretty, with dark hair and a soft smile. She was holding a little boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old, with Jonah's eyes and his mother's grin. Mara's heart clenched. She set the photograph down gently, her hands shaking. The door creaked open and Jonah stepped inside, an armful of firewood in his arms. He stopped short when he saw her standing by the mantel. His gaze flicked to the photograph and his entire body went rigid. I'm sorry, Mara said quickly. I didn't mean to. It's fine, Jonah said, his voice flat. He crossed to the fireplace and dumped the wood into the box beside it, his movements jerky, angry. Mara took a step back. Jonah? They're dead, Jonah said abruptly. He straightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. My wife. My son. Both of them. 3 years ago. Mara's breath left her in a rush. Jonah stared at the fire, his jaw working. There was a raid. Gang of outlaws rode through looking for me. Old grudge from before I settled here. They found my family instead. His voice cracked, just slightly, and he swallowed hard. I wasn't here, he said. I was in town, picking up supplies. By the time I got back, he stopped, shook his head. I buried them out back, he said quietly, under the cottonwood tree, and I've been here alone ever since. Mara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Jonah. Jonah finally looked at her, his eyes raw and red-rimmed. That's why I let you in, he said hoarsely, because I know what it's like to have nowhere to go, to be so desperate you'd rather die in the snow than keep begging for help. I know what that feels like. He turned away, his shoulders shaking. And I couldn't. His voice broke. I couldn't let it happen to someone else. Not if I could stop it. Mara crossed the room and laid a hand on his arm, tentative, gentle. You saved us, she whispered. You saved my son's life. And mine. Jonah closed his eyes, his breath shuddering. I couldn't save my own. That wasn't your fault, Mara said fiercely. You hear me, Jonah? That wasn't your fault. Jonah didn't answer. He just stood there, rigid and trembling, and let her hand rest on his arm. After a long moment, he pulled away gently and moved toward the door. Get some sleep, he said quietly. I'll see you in the morning. And then he was gone, slipping out into the cold night, leaving Mara standing alone by the fire. She looked down at the photograph on the mantel, at the woman and the little boy who would never come home, and she made a silent promise to them, and to Jonah, and to herself. She would honor this place, this second chance, this fragile, unexpected mercy. She would stay as long as he'd let her, and she would make sure that this house, this broken, grieving house, learned how to be a home again. The morning after Jonah's confession, Mara woke to find fresh eggs on the table and the stove already warm. She heard the rhythmic thunk of an axe splitting wood outside and rose carefully, settling Eli in his cradle before moving to the window. Jonah worked with fierce mechanical precision, his breath misting in the cold air. Each swing of the axe was harder than necessary, like he was trying to split more than just wood, like he was trying to crack open the grief itself and let it bleed out onto the frozen ground. Mara watched him for a long moment, then turned away and began preparing breakfast. When Jonah finally came inside, his face was flushed from exertion, his eyes carefully neutral. He nodded to her once, poured himself coffee, and stood at the stove drinking it in silence. "I made porridge," Mara said quietly. "If you're hungry." Jonah glanced at the pot, then at the table where she'd set out 2 bowls, 2 spoons, and a jar of honey she'd found in the back of the cupboard. "You don't have to cook for me," he said. "I know," Mara replied, "but I'm cooking anyway. Might as well make enough for 2. Jonah's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he'd refuse again, retreat back into his shell of isolation and grief. But then he set down his cup, crossed to the table, and sat. It was the first time he'd sat down to eat since she'd arrived. Mara joined him, ladling porridge into both bowls, drizzling honey over the top. They ate in silence, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of before. It was quieter, softer, almost companionable. When Eli started fussing, Jonah stood without a word, lifted the baby from the cradle, and handed him to Mara with surprising gentleness. "He's getting bigger," Jonah said. Mara smiled, settling Eli against her shoulder. "He's a fighter." Jonah's expression flickered, something raw and painful crossing his face before he shuddered it away. He cleared their bowls, rinsed them in the basin, and set them to dry. "I'm riding into town today," he said abruptly. "Need to check on supplies. Roads should be clear enough now." Mara's heart sank. "Do you want me gone before you get back?" Jonah turned to her, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "What?" "No, I'm asking if you need anything while I'm there." Mara blinked. "Oh. Cloth for the baby? Medicine? Anything?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't have money to pay you back." "Didn't ask if you did," Jonah said flatly. He grabbed his coat off the peg. "I'll be back before dark." He left before she could argue, the door clicking shut behind him with quiet finality. Mara sat there holding Eli, staring at the closed door, feeling something warm and fragile unfurling in her chest. Trust. She was starting to trust him, and that terrified her more than the blizzard ever had. Jonah returned just as the sun was setting, his saddlebags heavy with supplies. He unpacked them methodically: flour, salt, cornmeal, coffee, a sack of dried beans. Then he pulled out a bundle of soft cotton fabric, a ball of yarn, and a small wooden rattle. He set them on the table without meeting Mara's eyes. "For the boy," he muttered. Mara's throat tightened. She picked up the rattle, turning it over in her hands. It was simple, well made, the wood smooth and warm. "Jonah, this is too much." "It's nothing," he interrupted. He shrugged off his coat and moved to the stove. "Just things a baby needs." Mara watched him pour coffee, watched the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he avoided looking at Eli sleeping peacefully in the cradle. She understood then. Every time Jonah looked at her son, he saw his own. Every time he heard Eli cry or laugh or breathe, he remembered the boy he'd buried under the cottonwood tree. And still, he stayed. Still, he helped. Still, he opened his home and his dwindling supplies to a stranger and her child. "Did anyone ask about me?" Mara asked quietly. "In town." Jonah took a long drink of coffee. "No one knows you're here." Relief flooded through her. "Good." Jonah turned to face her, his eyes sharp. "Someone looking for you?" Mara's hands tightened around the rattle. "My husband's old gang. Maybe. I don't know. After he was hanged, some of them blamed me, said I should have warned them, should have helped him escape." "Did you know what he was doing?" Jonah asked. "Not at first," Mara said. Her voice came out flat, hollow. "I thought he was a ranch hand. Thought he worked honest jobs. By the time I found out the truth, I was already pregnant and we were already married." She looked down at Eli, her heart aching. "I tried to leave once. He found me, dragged me back, told me if I ran again he'd kill me and make it look like an accident. Jonah's expression went dark, dangerous. Where is he now? Dead, Mara said simply. Hanged for murder in Dodge City 6 weeks ago. And the town decided I was guilty by association. They took everything, our house, our belongings, every cent we had. Ran me out the day after Eli was born. She met Jonah's eyes, her chin lifting defiantly. So, no, I wasn't a willing part of his crimes, but I was his wife. And that's enough to make me guilty in most people's eyes. Jonah was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady and unflinching. Not in mine, he said finally. Mara's breath caught. Jonah set down his cup and crossed to the fireplace, feeding logs into the flames. Your husband made his choices. You made yours. You're not responsible for his blood. The town didn't see it that way, Mara said bitterly. The town's full of cowards and hypocrites, Jonah said flatly. They'll throw stones at a woman with a baby, but turn a blind eye when their own sons drink and gamble and whore their way through Saturday night. Mara almost smiled. You don't think much of people, do you? Jonah's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. I think most people are good at one thing, looking the other way when it's convenient. He straightened, brushing soot off his hands. But you're safe here, long as you want to stay. No one's running you off my land. Mara's eyes burned with unshed tears. Why are you doing this, Jonah? Really? Jonah looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Because someone should have done it for me, he said quietly, after I lost them. Someone should have let me in, let me grieve. Let me be something other than the man who couldn't save his family. He turned away, his voice rough. But they didn't, so I'm doing it for you. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, pausing on the threshold. Get some rest, he said. I'll be in the barn if you need me. And then he was gone, leaving Mara alone with her son and the firelight and the aching, overwhelming gratitude that made it hard to breathe. Over the next few weeks, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. It was slow and quiet and almost imperceptible, like ice melting at the edges of a frozen pond. Jonah stopped sleeping in the barn every night. Some evenings, he'd linger by the fire after supper, drinking coffee and staring into the flames while Mara mended clothes or rocked Eli to sleep. He didn't talk much, but he was there. Mara, in turn, stopped asking permission for every small thing. She cooked meals without apology, rearranged the cupboards to make more sense, planted herbs in small pots on the windowsill. She found a box of children's toys in the corner of the barn, wooden animals, a spinning top, a small leather ball, and brought them inside, setting them on the mantel beside the photograph. Jonah found them there one morning and stopped cold, his face going pale. I'm sorry, Mara said quickly. I should have asked. No, Jonah interrupted, his voice hoarse. He reached out and touched the wooden horse gently, his fingers trembling. No, they should be out. They shouldn't be hidden away like they never existed. Mara watched him, her heart breaking. Jonah cleared his throat and turned away. It's good. It's fine. But his hand shook as he poured his coffee, and he disappeared into the barn for the rest of the day. That night, Mara found a small pair of boots sitting by the door, child-sized, scuffed, well-worn. Jonah had placed them beside his own larger boots, lined up neatly against the wall. She didn't say anything. She just left them there. The next morning, Eli laughed for the first time, a bright, bubbling sound that filled the cabin like sunlight breaking through clouds. Jonah froze in the doorway, his arms full of firewood, staring at the baby with wide, stunned eyes. Eli kicked his tiny legs and laughed again, delighted by his own noise. And Jonah smiled. It was small, tentative, almost painful, but it was real. Mara felt tears sting her eyes. He likes you. Jonah set down the firewood carefully and crossed to the cradle. He looked down at Eli for a long moment, then reached out and let the baby grab his finger. Eli held on tight, gurgling happily, and Jonah's smile widened just a fraction. He's strong, Jonah said quietly. He gets it from his mama, Mara replied. Jonah glanced at her, something soft and warm flickering in his eyes. Yeah, he does. Spring began to creep across the prairie in slow, stubborn increments. The snow melted, revealing brown grass and muddy earth. Ice broke apart in the creek behind the house, and the wind lost its bitter edge. Mara began venturing outside, first just to the chicken coop, then to the garden plot, then all the way to the barn where Jonah kept his horses and a few head of cattle. She found him one afternoon repairing a fence, his shirt sleeves rolled up despite the chill, his hands quick and sure. "Need help?" she called. Jonah looked up, surprised. "You don't have to—" "I know," Mara interrupted. She set Eli down in a basket padded with blankets and picked up a hammer. "Show me what to do." Jonah hesitated, then nodded. "Hold this post steady while I nail it." They worked side by side in silence, the rhythm of hammer strikes and the creak of wood filling the air. Eli dozed in his basket, lulled by the sounds and the fresh breeze. When the fence was mended, Jonah stepped back and surveyed their work. "You're stronger than you look." Mara laughed. A real laugh, rusty from disuse. "I've been hauling water and chopping vegetables for weeks. I'm not made of glass." Jonah's mouth twitched. "No, you're not." He looked at her for a moment, something unreadable in his eyes, then turned away. "Come on, I'll show you the rest of the place." He led her through the barn, pointing out each animal, explaining the chores, the routines, the small rituals that kept the ranch running. Mara listened carefully, committing it all to memory. When they reached the far end of the property, Jonah stopped beneath a large cottonwood tree. Two simple wooden crosses stood at its base, weathered and worn, but still standing. Mara's breath caught. Jonah stared at the graves, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. "This is Anna," he said quietly, nodding to the larger cross. "And that's Samuel." Mara stepped closer, reading the names carved carefully into the wood. Anna Carver, Samuel Carver, beloved wife and mother, beloved son. "They were everything," Jonah said, his voice breaking. "And I wasn't here." Mara reached out and took his hand, squeezing gently. Jonah closed his eyes, his shoulders shaking. "I should have been here." "You would have died too," Mara said fiercely, "and then there'd be 3 graves under this tree instead of 2. Jonah opened his eyes, tears streaming down his face. "Maybe that would have been better." "No," Mara said, "because then you wouldn't have been here to save us. Eli would be dead, I'd be dead, and this place, this beautiful, heartbreaking place, would be empty forever." Jonah stared at her, his breath hitching. "You can't change what happened," Mara said gently, "but you can choose what happens next." Jonah pulled his hand away and scrubbed at his face roughly. "I don't know how." "Neither do I," Mara admitted, "but we can figure it out together." Jonah looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe we can." That night, Jonah didn't go to the barn. He sat by the fire, whittling a small piece of wood while Mara darned socks. Eli lay on a blanket between them, kicking his legs and making happy nonsense sounds. "What are you making?" Mara asked. Jonah held up the half-formed shape. "A bird, I think. It's been a while." "It's good," Mara said. Jonah snorted. "It's lopsided." "Then it's a lopsided bird," Mara said with a smile. "Eli won't care." Jonah's hands stilled. He looked down at the baby, his expression softening. "No, I guess he won't." They fell into comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the whisper of Jonah's knife against the wood. "Mara," Jonah said suddenly. "Yeah?" "Thank you." Mara looked up, confused. "For what?" Jonah gestured vaguely around the cabin. "For this. For making it feel like a home again." Mara's throat tightened. "You let me stay. It's the least I could do." "No," Jonah said quietly. "You gave me a reason to stay." "That's not the same thing." Mara met his eyes across the firelight, and something passed between them, something fragile and tentative and impossibly precious. Hope. Not just for survival, not just for safety. Hope for something more. The peace shattered on a cold April morning when a rider appeared on the horizon. Mara saw him first. She was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, Eli strapped against her chest in a sling she'd fashioned from an old shawl, when movement caught her eye. A single horseman, riding hard toward the ranch. Her blood turned to ice. "Jonah!" she called, her voice sharp with fear. Jonah appeared from the barn, his rifle already in his hands. He followed her gaze and swore under his breath. "Get inside," he ordered. "Bar the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." Jonah, "Now, Mara." She ran. By the time she reached the cabin and slammed the door shut, dropping the heavy wooden bar into place, her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold Eli. She pressed her back against the door, her heart hammering, and listened. The sound of hooves. A man's voice, rough and unfamiliar. "Well, well, Jonah Carver. Been a long time." Jonah's reply was cold, flat. "Not long enough. What do you want, Hayes?" Hayes. The name sent a chill down Mara's spine. She didn't know him, but she knew the tone, the casual cruelty, the lazy menace of a man who enjoyed other people's fear. "Heard you had company," Hayes said. "Woman and a baby. That true?" Mara's breath stopped. "None of your business," Jonah said. Hayes laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "See, I think it is my business. Because that woman, she's got a bounty on her head, $50, dead or alive. Her husband's old gang wants her back. Says she knows where he hid some gold before he got strung up." Mara's vision blurred. $50, dead or alive. "She's not here," Jonah said. "Come on now, Carver. I saw the laundry, saw the baby clothes." Hayes' voice dropped, dangerous. "You hiding outlaws now? That's not like you." "She's not an outlaw," Jonah said, his voice hard as iron. "She's a widow with a baby, and she's under my protection." "Your protection don't mean much out here," Hayes said. "Now step aside or I'll go through you." The sound of a gun cocking echoed through the yard. "You can try," Jonah said quietly. Silence. Then Hayes laughed again, but it sounded forced. "You'd shoot me? Over some outlaw's whore?" "I'd shoot you for trespassing," Jonah replied. "Now get off my land before I put a bullet between your eyes." More silence. Mara pressed her ear against the door, her heart in her throat. Finally, Hayes spoke again, his voice thick with anger. "This ain't over, Carver. That bounty's good money. I'll be back. And next time, I'll bring help." The sound of hooves again, fast and furious, fading into the distance. Mara waited, hardly daring to breathe, until Jonah knocked on the door. "Mara, it's me. Open up." She lifted the bar with trembling hands and pulled the door open. Jonah stepped inside, his face grim, his rifle still in his hands. "He's gone," he said. "For now." Mara sank onto the bench, clutching Eli. "He said there's a bounty, $50. They think I know where my husband hid gold." "Do you?" Jonah asked. "No," Mara said desperately. "I swear, I don't know anything about any gold. He never told me where he kept his money. I barely saw him for weeks at a time." Jonah believed her. She could see it in his eyes. "It doesn't matter," he said. "They'll come back anyway. Men like Hayes don't care about the truth. They just want the money." Mara looked up at him, her eyes burning. "Then I'll leave. Tonight. I'll take Eli and go before they come back. I won't let them hurt you because of me." "No," Jonah said flatly. "Jonah, I said no." He set the rifle down and crouched in front of her, his eyes fierce. "You're not running. Not again. This is your home now, and I'll be damned if I let some two-bit bounty hunter drive you off." "He'll bring others," Mara whispered. "You could die." "I've been dead for 3 years," Jonah said quietly. "You and Eli, you made me feel alive again. I'm not letting that go without a fight." Mara stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Jonah reached out and wiped them away gently, his rough thumb catching on her cheekbone. "We'll figure this out," he said. "Together, like you said." Mara nodded, unable to speak. Jonah stood and picked up his rifle again. "I'm going to ride the perimeter. Make sure he's really gone. You stay inside, keep the door barred." "Be careful," Mara whispered. Jonah paused at the door and looked back at her, something soft and almost tender in his eyes. "Always am," he said. And then he was gone, leaving Mara alone with her son and the terrible, fragile knowledge that she wasn't alone anymore. She had someone willing to fight for her, and that changed everything. Jonah returned 2 hours later, his face grim but his shoulders steady. He'd ridden a wide circle around the property and found nothing except Hayes' tracks heading northeast toward town. "He's gone," Jonah said, leaning his rifle against the wall. But he meant what he said. He'll be back. Mara had spent those 2 hours pacing the cabin like a caged animal, Eli fussing in her arms as if he could sense her fear. Now she turned to Jonah, her jaw set. Then we need to be ready. Jonah studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You're not arguing about leaving anymore. You made it clear I'm not going anywhere, Mara said. So if I'm staying, I'm fighting. Jonah's mouth twitched, almost a smile. You know how to shoot? My father taught me before he died, Mara said. I'm not a great shot, but I can hit what I'm aiming at if it's close enough. Good, Jonah said. He crossed to a trunk in the corner and pulled out a revolver, checking the cylinder before handing it to her. Keep this on you at all times. If anyone comes near this house that you don't know, you shoot first and ask questions later. Mara took the gun, feeling its weight settle into her palm. What about you? I'll set up watch points around the property, Jonah said. Tripwires, bells, anything that'll give us warning if someone's coming. And I'll teach you the land, where to hide, where to run if things go bad. And if they come at night? Mara asked quietly. Jonah's expression hardened. Then we make sure they regret it. Over the next 3 days, Jonah transformed the ranch into a fortress. He strung thin wire between fence posts that would rattle tin cans if disturbed. He positioned buckets of nails and broken glass along the approaches to the house. He showed Mara a root cellar hidden beneath a false panel in the kitchen floor where she could hide with Eli if attackers breached the cabin. Stay down there until you hear my voice, he instructed. Not anyone else's, just mine. Mara nodded, memorizing every detail, every instruction. She practiced loading and firing the revolver until her hands stopped shaking and her aim steadied. She learned which floorboards creaked, which windows offered the best sightlines, which escape routes led to the thick stand of cottonwoods by the creek. At night, they took turns keeping watch. Jonah would sit by the window with his rifle across his knees while Mara slept fitfully in the bedroom, Eli tucked close against her side. Then, when the moon reached its peak, she'd rise and take his place while he caught a few hours of rest in the chair by the fire. It was exhausting, terrifying, and somehow, through it all, Mara felt more alive than she had in years. On the 4th night after Hayes' visit, Mara was on watch when she heard it, the soft jingle of metal on metal from somewhere north of the house. Her heart slammed into her throat. She grabbed the rifle leaning against the wall and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. Nothing. Just shadows and moonlight. Then she heard it again. Closer this time. Jonah, she hissed. He was on his feet instantly, moving to her side with his own rifle already raised. He pressed close to the window, his breath warm against her ear as he whispered, How many? I don't know, Mara breathed. I only heard the wire trip once. Jonah's jaw tightened. Could be a coyote. Could be worse. Stay here. If anyone but me comes through that door, shoot them. Jonah, wait! But he was already moving, slipping out the back door into the night like a shadow. Mara stood frozen at the window, her rifle trembling in her hands, straining her eyes against the darkness. Every sound seemed amplified, the wind in the grass, the creak of the barn door, the distant cry of an owl. Then she saw movement. A figure emerging from the trees, hunched and cautious, moving toward the barn. Her finger tightened on the trigger. A second figure appeared. Then a third. Mara's blood turned to ice. 3 men, maybe more in the darkness beyond. Where was Jonah? She scanned the yard desperately and finally spotted him, a darker shadow pressed against the side of the barn, his rifle aimed at the approaching figures. The lead man raised his hand, signaling the others to stop. He called out, his voice carrying across the yard. Carver, we know you're out here. We just want the woman. Give her up and we'll leave peaceful. Jonah didn't respond. He stayed perfectly still, waiting. The man tried again. Come on now. This don't have to get ugly. That bounty's good money. You could split it with us. Nobody has to die. Mara's hands shook. She recognized that voice. It was Hayes, back like he'd promised, but this time he'd brought friends. Still, Jonah said nothing. Hayes's patience broke. Fine. Have it your way. Boys, burn the barn. That'll flush him out. Mara watched in horror as one of the men lit a torch, the flame suddenly bright and vicious in the darkness. That's when Jonah fired. The shot cracked through the night like thunder. The man with the torch dropped it, clutching his shoulder and screaming. The torch fell into dry grass and caught immediately, flames spreading fast. All hell broke loose. The other two men scattered, firing wildly toward the barn. Jonah dove behind a water trough, returning fire with deadly precision. One man went down, then another. But Hayes was still standing, and he was moving, not toward Jonah, but toward the house, toward Mara. She saw him coming and backed away from the window, her rifle raised, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. The front door exploded inward, the bar splintering under the force of Hayes' boot. Mara fired. The bullet went wide, punching through the door frame beside Hayes' head. He ducked, then lunged forward, knocking the rifle from her hands before she could fire again. "There you are," he snarled, grabbing her by the throat and slamming her against the wall. Mara clawed at his hands, gasping for air. From the bedroom, Eli started screaming. Hayes grinned, his teeth yellow in the firelight from the burning grass outside. "That the baby? Maybe I'll take him too, sell him to some family that wants a kid, make double the bounty." Rage exploded through Mara's terror. She stopped clawing at his hands and instead drove her knee up hard into his groin. Hayes howled and loosened his grip just enough. Mara twisted free, grabbed the revolver from her belt, and fired point blank into his chest. Hayes staggered backward, his eyes wide with shock. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt, then up at Mara, then collapsed onto the floor. Mara stood there shaking, the gun still raised, staring at the man she'd just killed. The door burst open again and she spun, finger tightening on the trigger. But it was Jonah, his face streaked with soot and blood, his eyes wild. "Mara!" She lowered the gun, her legs giving out. Jonah caught her before she hit the floor, pulling her against his chest. "It's over," he said hoarsely. "They're all dead. It's over." Mara couldn't speak. She just clung to him, shaking violently, while Eli's cries echoed through the cabin. Jonah held her for one more second, then gently pulled away. "I need to put out that fire before it spreads to the house. Can you stand?" Mara nodded, forcing herself upright. "Go. I'll take care of Eli." Jonah grabbed a bucket and ran back outside. Mara stumbled to the bedroom, scooped up her screaming son, and sank onto the bed, rocking him frantically. "Shh, shh. It's okay. Mama's here. You're safe. You're safe." But she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince, Eli or herself. Through the window, she could see Jonah working frantically to beat out the flames with wet blankets, hauling water from the trough, stamping on burning grass. The fire had spread, but not far. He'd caught it in time. Slowly, terribly, Eli's cries subsided into hiccuping whimpers. Mara held him close, breathing in his baby smell, grounding herself in the warmth of his small body. She'd killed a man tonight, shot him dead without hesitation. And the worst part? She didn't feel guilty. She felt nothing but cold, fierce satisfaction that he'd never threaten her son again. What did that make her? Jonah came back inside an hour later, exhausted and reeking of smoke. He looked at Hayes' body sprawled on the floor, then at Mara sitting on the edge of the bed with Eli asleep in her arms. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "I killed him," Mara said, her voice hollow. "I know. I didn't hesitate." "Good," Jonah said. He crossed to her and crouched down, meeting her eyes. "He was going to kill you. Maybe kill Eli. You did what you had to do." "Have you ever killed someone?" Mara asked. Jonah's expression went dark. "Yes." "Does it get easier?" "No," Jonah said honestly, "but it gets necessary sometimes. And when it does, you do it and you live with it. That's all you can do." Mara looked down at Eli's peaceful sleeping face and felt something harden inside her chest, something fierce and unyielding and utterly unbreakable. She would protect this child, no matter what it cost, no matter who she had to become. "What do we do with the bodies?" she asked. Jonah stood. "I'll bury them in the morning, far from the house, far from Anna and Samuel." His voice roughened on their names. "They don't deserve to rest near good people." Mara nodded. "And if more come?" "Then we'll be ready," Jonah said grimly, "same as we were tonight." He dragged Hayes' body outside, leaving a dark smear of blood across the floorboards. Mara would scrub it away in the morning. For now, she just sat there holding her son, listening to Jonah moving around outside, and tried to remember what peace felt like. When Jonah finally came back in, the sky was starting to lighten in the east. He barred what was left of the broken door, wedging it shut with a chair, then collapsed into his seat by the fire. Mara stood carefully, settling Eli back in his cradle, and moved to stand beside Jonah. "You're bleeding," she said, noticing for the first time the gash across his forearm where a bullet had grazed him. "It's nothing," Jonah muttered. "It's not nothing." Mara fetched water and cloth and began cleaning the wound with gentle efficiency. Jonah sat still, watching her work, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "You saved us," Mara said softly. "Again." "You saved yourself," Jonah replied. "I heard that shot from outside, knew you'd handled it. I was terrified." "Being terrified doesn't make you weak," Jonah said. "Doing it anyway, that's what makes you strong." Mara tied off the bandage and met his eyes. In the pale dawn light, she could see every line of grief and pain and stubborn survival etched into his face. She could see the man who'd lost everything and kept going anyway, the man who'd opened his door to a stranger in a blizzard, the man who'd fought for her tonight like she was worth dying for. "Jonah," she whispered. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch impossibly gentle. "Yeah? Thank you." He shook his head. "You don't have to." Mara pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. "Yes, I do. You gave me a home. You gave Eli a chance. You gave us both a reason to believe we might actually survive this." Jonah's eyes darkened. He caught her hand, holding it against his jaw. "You gave me a reason to keep living," he said hoarsely. "That's worth more than you know." They stayed like that for a long moment, the space between them charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Then Eli started fussing, breaking the spell. Mara pulled away, flushing, and hurried to tend to him. Behind her, she heard Jonah exhale slowly and stand, moving back to the window to watch the sunrise. Neither of them spoke about what had almost happened, but they both felt it, the shift, the change, the fragile beginning of something that terrified them both. Because caring about someone meant you could lose them, and they'd both already lost too much. The days that followed were tense and exhausting. Jonah rode into town to report the attack to the marshal, spinning a careful story about defending his property from claim jumpers. The marshal, a tired man with no interest in investigating too deeply, recorded it in his log and told Jonah to be more careful about who he let onto his land. No mention was made of Mara. No mention of bounties or outlaws or widows with babies. Jonah came home and told her she was safe, at least from the law. But there might be more bounty hunters, he warned. If Hayes told others where he was going, they'll come looking when he doesn't come back. "Then we stay ready," Mara said simply. And they did. The tripwires stayed up, the guns stayed loaded, the watches continued through the night. But something else happened too. The cabin, which had started to feel like a home during those early spring weeks, now felt like a fortress they were defending together. Every meal they shared, every chore they split, every quiet evening by the fire became an act of defiance against the world that wanted to tear them apart. Mara found herself watching Jonah more than she should, noticing the way his hands moved when he worked, the rare flash of his smile when Eli did something amusing, the careful way he avoided standing too close to her after that moment by the fire. And she saw him watching her too, saw the way his eyes followed her when she moved around the cabin, the way he tensed when she came too close, the way he held himself back like he was afraid of what might happen if he let himself want something again. One evening, as Mara was kneading bread dough at the table, Eli started babbling from his place on the floor. She looked up and froze. Jonah was crouched beside the baby, holding out the wooden bird he'd finished carving. Eli reached for it with chubby hands, grasping it triumphantly and immediately trying to shove it in his mouth. Jonah laughed, a real laugh, deep and surprised, and gently redirected the toy away from Eli's drooling mouth. "Not for eating, little man," he said. "For playing." Eli made an indignant sound and reached for Jonah's beard instead, tangling tiny fingers in the thick hair. "Ow! Hey, easy there," Jonah said, but he was still smiling as he carefully extracted Eli's grip. He lifted the baby up, settling him against his shoulder, and stood. That's when he caught Mara staring. The smile faded. The careful walls went back up. "Sorry," he said stiffly. "I should have asked before picking him up." "No," Mara said quickly. No, you're good with him. Jonah looked down at Eli, who was now happily gumming his shoulder. Anna used to say I was too gentle with Samuel, that I'd spoil him. It was the first time he'd said his wife's name out loud since showing Mara the graves. I don't think you can spoil a baby with too much love, Mara said softly. Jonah's throat worked. Anna would have liked you, he said abruptly. She would have... He stopped, shaking his head. Never mind. Tell me, Mara said. She abandoned the bread dough and wiped her hands on her apron. Please, I want to know about her. Jonah was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he carried Eli over to the rocking chair and sat down carefully, still holding the baby. She was kind, he said finally. Kinder than anyone I've ever known. Used to take in stray animals, bake extra bread for neighbors who were struggling, sit with sick folks even when everyone else was too scared of catching whatever they had. He smoothed Eli's sparse hair with one rough hand. And she was strong. God, she was strong. When Samuel was born, she nearly died. Bled so much I thought I'd lost her. But she fought through it. Held that baby and smiled at me like she'd just done the easiest thing in the world. His voice cracked. She deserved better than what she got. They both did. Mara moved closer, perching on the arm of the chair. Tell me about Samuel. A ghost of a smile crossed Jonah's face. He was wild. Couldn't keep that boy still for more than 2 seconds. Always running, climbing, getting into mischief. He once tried to ride one of the barn cats like it was a horse. Despite everything, Mara laughed. How'd that go? About as well as you'd expect, Jonah said. Cat scratched him up pretty good, but Samuel just laughed about it. Said the cat was spirited. He shook his head. Anna said he got that from me. The stubborn refusal to admit when he was wrong. Sounds like good traits for surviving out here, Mara said. Maybe, Jonah said, but it didn't save him when it mattered. The silence that followed was heavy, painful. Eli squirmed in Jonah's arms and made a small sound. He likes you, Mara said softly. Eli, he feels safe with you. Jonah looked down at the baby, his expression unreadable. I like him too. Then so quietly Mara almost didn't hear it. It scares me. How much I like him. Why? Because everyone I love dies, Jonah said bluntly. He looked up at her, his eyes raw and honest. My parents, my wife, my son, and now here you are with this baby, and every time I look at him I think, what if something happens? What if I can't protect him either? You've already protected us, Mara said, multiple times. But what if it's not enough? Jonah's voice broke. What if... Jonah... Mara slid off the chair arm and knelt in front of him, taking his free hand in both of hers. You can't live your whole life afraid of losing people. That's not living at all. It's safer, Jonah said. It's lonelier, Mara countered. Trust me, I know. I spent months after my husband died thinking I was better off alone, that I didn't need anyone, didn't want anyone, and then you let me in and showed me that maybe I was wrong. Jonah stared at her, his jaw tight. Mara, I'm scared too, she interrupted. I'm terrified. Every night I lie awake thinking about what would happen if more bounty hunters come. If they kill you. If they take Eli. If I lose this place and have to run again. She squeezed his hand. But I'd rather be scared here with you than safe and alone somewhere else. Jonah's breath shuddered out. He looked down at Eli, who had fallen asleep against his chest, then back at Mara. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. How to let people in again. Neither do I, Mara said. So we'll figure it out together, one day at a time. Jonah held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. One day at a time. Mara stood, but before she could step away, Jonah caught her wrist gently. Mara, he said, I'm glad you knocked on my door that night. Mara's throat tightened. Me too. She returned to her bread dough, and Jonah stayed in the rocking chair with Eli, and the evening settled around them quiet and warm and impossibly precious. That night, when Mara came to relieve Jonah for her watch shift, she found him asleep in the chair, Eli cradled carefully in his arms. Both of them were breathing slow and deep, Eli's tiny hand fisted in Jonah's shirt. Mara stood there for a long moment, her heart aching, and carefully lifted Eli without waking either of them. She settled the baby in his cradle, then draped a blanket over Jonah's sleeping form. He stirred slightly, mumbling something incoherent, and Mara froze. Then he settled again, and she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She took up her post by the window, rifle across her knees, and watched the moonlit prairie for threats that didn't come. But her mind kept drifting back to Jonah's words. Everyone I love dies. And she found herself making a silent, fierce promise, not to the night, not to God, but to herself. She would do everything in her power to make sure that didn't happen this time, no matter what it cost. 3 weeks passed without incident, and slowly, so slowly Mara almost didn't notice, the tension began to ease from Jonah's shoulders. The tripwires stayed up, but they stopped jumping at every sound. The guns stayed loaded, but they no longer slept in shifts. Instead, they moved through their days with a cautious rhythm that felt almost normal, almost like the life they might have had if the world had been kinder to them both. Jonah taught Mara how to milk the goats and mend harnesses and read the sky for coming weather. She taught him how to make his coffee less bitter and showed him her mother's recipe for cornbread that came out sweet and crumbly. Eli grew stronger every day, his legs kicking with more force, his eyes tracking movement, his hands reaching for everything within grasp. One morning, Mara found Jonah in the barn replacing a broken stall door. She'd come looking for eggs and instead found him stripped to his undershirt despite the lingering spring chill, sweat gleaming on his neck and arms as he worked. "Need help?" she called. Jonah looked up, startled, and wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. "I've got it. You should rest." "I've been resting all morning while Eli napped," Mara said. "Let me do something useful." Jonah hesitated, then gestured to a pile of boards. "Hold those steady while I nail them." They worked in companionable silence, the sound of hammering echoing through the barn. Mara watched Jonah's hands move with practiced efficiency, watched the way his muscles shifted beneath his shirt, watched the concentration on his face. She was staring. She knew she was staring, but she couldn't seem to stop. "Mara," Jonah said suddenly, and she jumped. "What?" "You're holding that board crooked." Heat flooded her cheeks. "Sorry." She adjusted her grip, keeping her eyes firmly on the wood this time. When the door was finished, Jonah stepped back to admire their work. "That'll hold." "You're good at this," Mara said. "Building things, fixing things." Jonah shrugged. "Had to learn. Out here, if something breaks, you fix it yourself or you do without." "Did your father teach you?" "Some," Jonah said. "The rest I figured out through trial and error." He ran his hand along the smooth wood. "Anna used to say I was too stubborn to ask for help even when I needed it." Mara smiled. She wasn't wrong. Jonah shot her a look, but there was no heat in it, just something warm and almost fond. "You calling me stubborn?" "If the boot fits," Mara said. Jonah's mouth twitched. Then, to her absolute shock, he laughed, a real full laugh that transformed his entire face. Mara stared at him, stunned. In all the weeks she'd been here, she'd heard him chuckle once or twice, but never like this, never open and genuine and free. "What?" Jonah asked, catching her expression. "Nothing," Mara said quickly. "Just, you should laugh more often." The laughter faded, but the warmth in his eyes remained. "Maybe I will," he said quietly, "if you keep giving me reasons to." The air between them shifted, grew heavier. Mara's pulse kicked up. From the house, Eli's cry pierced the moment. "I should—" Mara started. "Yeah," Jonah said. "Go ahead." Mara hurried back to the cabin, her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with her son's fussing. That evening, after Eli was fed and drowsing against her shoulder, Jonah came inside carrying something wrapped in cloth. "What's that?" Mara asked. Jonah unwrapped it carefully, revealing a pair of tiny leather boots. They were beautifully made, soft and supple, with careful stitching and small brass buckles. "For Eli," Jonah said. "Figured he'd need them soon. He's starting to pull himself up on things." Mara's throat tightened. "Jonah, they're beautiful. Did you make them?" "Tried to," Jonah said, looking embarrassed. "They're not perfect, but they're perfect," Mara interrupted. She took them from him, running her fingers over the soft leather. "Thank you." Jonah nodded, then moved to the hearth. He crouched down and lined up the little boots between his own worn work boots and Mara's smaller pair. 3 sets of boots, 3 people. 1 family. Mara's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. Jonah stood and turned to find her watching him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jonah cleared his throat and moved to pour coffee, and the moment passed like smoke through fingers. But the boots stayed there, a silent claim, a quiet promise, and neither of them moved them. The next day brought unexpected visitors. Mara was hanging laundry when she heard the sound of wagon wheels and looked up to see an older woman driving a buckboard toward the house, a girl of maybe 12 or 13 sitting beside her. Mara's first instinct was panic. She dropped the wet shirt she'd been hanging and ran for the house, calling for Jonah. He appeared from the barn, rifle in hand, but relaxed slightly when he saw the wagon. "It's Martha Greer and her granddaughter," he said. "Nearest neighbor, about 8 miles east. They're harmless." "Should I hide?" Mara asked. "No," Jonah said firmly. "You're my—" He stopped, seemed to struggle for a word. "You live here. You've got nothing to hide." The wagon pulled up, and the woman, Martha, climbed down with surprising agility for her age. She was tall and thin, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Jonah Carver," she said, "as I live and breathe, I was starting to think you'd turned into a complete hermit." "Mrs. Greer," Jonah said with a nod, "what brings you out this way?" Martha's eyes had already found Mara, standing frozen in the doorway with Eli on her hip. "Heard you had company. Thought I'd come see for myself." "Word travels fast," Jonah said dryly. "It does when Tom Harris mentioned seeing a woman's wash on your line," Martha said. She walked right up to Mara, ignoring all social niceties, and studied her with unsettling intensity. "Well now, you're younger than I expected." Mara lifted her chin. "I'm Mara Lindell." "Lindell," Martha repeated, her brow furrowing. Then recognition dawned in her eyes, swift and damning. "Lindell, that was the name of the outlaw they hanged in Dodge City a few months back." Mara's blood turned to ice. "Mrs. Greer," Jonah started, his voice hard, but Martha held up a hand, still staring at Mara. "You his widow?" There was no point in lying. "Yes." "You know about his crimes?" "Not until it was too late," Mara said. "And by then I was pregnant and had nowhere else to go." Martha's expression didn't soften, but something shifted in her eyes. She looked at Eli, then at Jonah, then back at Mara. "Town run you out?" she asked. "Yes." "With a newborn baby?" "Yes." Martha made a disgusted sound. "Cowards, the lot of them. Brave enough to throw stones at a woman with a baby, but turn a blind eye when their own sons drink themselves stupid every Saturday night." She turned to Jonah. "She is staying here permanent?" Jonah's jaw set. "As long as she wants. People will talk." "Let them," Jonah said flatly. Martha studied him for a long moment, then nodded sharply. "Good. About time you stopped hiding out here like a ghost." She turned back to Mara. "I brought some things. Figured if you're living out here with this stubborn fool, you'll need them." The granddaughter, who'd been watching everything with wide eyes, climbed down from the wagon and retrieved a large basket. Inside were jars of preserves, a sack of flour, a tin of tea, and a bundle of baby clothes. Mara's eyes filled with tears. We can't afford—" "Didn't ask if you could afford it," Martha interrupted. "You've got a baby. Baby needs things. That's the end of it." She handed the basket to Mara, her expression stern but not unkind. "You look after Jonah. He's too proud to admit when he needs help, but he needs it. And you—" She poked Jonah in the chest. "You look after her and that baby. Don't you dare let her work herself to death trying to prove she deserves to be here." "Yes, ma'am," Jonah said quietly. Martha nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now, we'll be going. Sarah, get back in the wagon." The girl climbed up obediently, and Martha followed. But before she took the reins, she looked back at Mara one more time. "You need anything at all, you send word. Jonah knows where to find me." Her voice softened just slightly. "Every woman deserves a second chance. Don't let anyone tell you different." Then she snapped the reins and the wagon rolled away, leaving Mara standing there clutching the basket and trying not to cry. Jonah touched her elbow gently. "You all right?" "She knew," Mara whispered. "She knew who I was, and she still—" "Martha Greer lost her husband and 2 sons in the war," Jonah said. She knows what it's like when the world decides you're guilty by association. She won't talk. How do you know? Because she's the only person who came to Anna and Samuel's funeral, Jonah said quietly. Everyone else was too afraid of whatever grudge might follow me home. But Martha showed up with food and prayers and sat with me while I buried them. His voice roughened. She's good people, one of the few left. Mara looked down at the basket, at the careful gifts chosen by a woman who understood suffering. I don't know how to thank her. You survive, Jonah said. You take care of that boy, and you build a life here. That's thanks enough. That night, Mara opened one of the jars of preserves, strawberry, sweet, and perfect, and spread it on fresh bread. They ate in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, full of something that felt dangerously close to contentment. Eli sat in Jonah's lap, gnawing on a crust of bread and making happy sounds. Jonah watched him with an expression Mara had never seen before, soft, unguarded, almost peaceful. He's getting so big, Jonah said. I know, Mara replied. Soon he'll be walking and getting into everything. Good, Jonah said. House is too quiet anyway. Mara smiled. You say that now. Wait until he's knocking over your coffee and trying to climb the furniture. Samuel did that, Jonah said suddenly. Climbed everything. One time I found him on top of the wardrobe. Still don't know how he got up there. What did you do? Got him down and then spent the next hour moving everything he could possibly climb, Jonah said. Anna laughed at me, said I was being overprotective. His smile was bittersweet. She was probably right. You were being a father, Mara said softly. That's what fathers do. Jonah looked down at Eli, who had abandoned the bread crust and was now trying to grab Jonah's beard again. I'm not his father. No, Mara agreed. But you could be. The words hung in the air between them, too big, too honest, too dangerous to take back. Jonah's hands tightened around Eli. Mara, I'm not asking you for anything, Mara said quickly. I'm just saying, Eli doesn't know his real father, never will, but he knows you. He lights up when he sees you. He reaches for you. He feels safe with you. That doesn't make me his father, Jonah said, but his voice was uncertain. Maybe not, Mara said, but it makes you something, and that something matters. Jonah was quiet for a long time, staring down at the baby in his lap. Then Eli looked up at him and smiled, a real, genuine, gummy smile, and reached up to pat Jonah's face with one tiny hand, and Jonah's carefully constructed walls crumbled. Yeah, he said hoarsely. Yeah, it matters. He stood carefully, cradling Eli against his chest, and carried him to the cradle. He laid the baby down gently, tucking the blankets around him with infinite care. Then he turned to Mara, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. How to love someone again without being terrified of losing them. You do it anyway, Mara said. She stood and crossed to him, reaching up to touch his face the same way Eli had. You do it scared. You do it knowing it might hurt. But you do it because the alternative, living without love, without connection, without hope, that hurts worse. Jonah caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. What if I fail? What if you don't? Mara countered. They stood there in the firelight, close enough to feel each other's breath, close enough that all it would take was one step, one movement, one moment of courage. But neither of them moved. Not yet. Not quite yet. Jonah released her hand gently and stepped back. Get some rest. I'll take first watch. You don't have to cheat. I know, Jonah said, but I will anyway. He grabbed his rifle and settled into the chair by the window, and Mara retreated to the bedroom, her heart racing and her mind spinning with everything unsaid. The weeks continued to pass, and with them came small, precious moments of normalcy. Jonah fixed the broken front door and replaced it with one that had a stronger bar. Mara planted a vegetable garden, turning over soil and pressing seeds into the earth with hopeful hands. Eli learned to sit up on his own, wobbling but determined, and both adults hovered anxiously nearby, ready to catch him if he toppled. One afternoon, Mara was weeding the garden while Eli napped inside and Jonah worked nearby repairing fence posts. The sun was warm, the breeze was gentle, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Mara felt something close to happiness. "Mara!" Jonah called suddenly, his voice tight. She looked up to find him standing rigid, staring toward the road. Another rider. This time, two of them. Terror flooded through her. "Jonah, get inside," he ordered. "Now!" Mara ran for the house, her heart hammering. She grabbed the revolver from the table and positioned herself by the window, ready to shoot if needed. But as the riders got closer, Jonah lowered his rifle. "It's all right," he called to her. "It's the marshal." Mara's fear shifted into something colder. The marshal. The law. Had someone reported her? Was she about to be arrested? The two men rode up and dismounted. The marshal was the same tired-looking man from before, but his companion was younger, cleaner, wearing a badge that marked him as a deputy from another county. "Carver," the marshal said with a nod. "Got a minute?" "What's this about?" Jonah asked, his voice carefully neutral. The deputy stepped forward. "We're looking for a woman named Mara Lindell, widow of the outlaw Jack Lindell. We have reason to believe she might be in this area." Mara's blood turned to ice. "Why are you looking for her?" Jonah asked. "Her husband's gang has been causing trouble," the deputy said. "Robbing stages, killing folks. We think she might know where they're hiding." "And if she doesn't?" Jonah asked. The deputy shrugged. "Then we bring her in for questioning anyway. See what she knows." Jonah's expression hardened. "You want to arrest a woman for the crimes of her dead husband?" "We want to talk to her," the marshal said. "That's all. Just talk." "And if she doesn't want to talk?" The deputy's hand drifted toward his gun. "Then we'll have a problem." Inside the house, Mara pressed her back against the wall, her mind racing. She could run, grab Eli and run out the back, head for the trees, disappear. But where would she go? How far would she get with a baby? And what would happen to Jonah if she ran? Would they arrest him for harboring a fugitive? She couldn't let that happen. She wouldn't. Mara set down the gun, straightened her shoulders, and walked out the front door. All three men turned to stare at her. "I'm Mara Lindell," she said, her voice steady despite her terror. "And I don't know anything about my husband's gang. I haven't seen or heard from any of them since before he was hanged." The deputy's eyes narrowed. "That's convenient." "It's the truth," Mara said flatly. "Maybe," the deputy said. "Maybe not. Either way, you're coming with us." "No," Jonah said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a threat. "She's not." The deputy's hand closed around his gun. "You interfering with the law, Carver?" "I'm protecting an innocent woman and her baby," Jonah said. "If you want to take her, you'll have to go through me first." The marshal sighed. "Jonah, don't be stupid about this." "I'm not being stupid," Jonah said. "I'm being decent, something you two seem to have forgotten." The deputy drew his gun. "Last chance, Carver. Step aside." Jonah didn't move. His rifle stayed aimed at the ground, but his stance was ready, coiled, dangerous. Mara's heart was in her throat. "Jonah, don't—" "Marshal," a new voice called out. Everyone turned. Martha Greer's wagon was rolling up the road, the old woman sitting tall and imperious in the driver's seat. She pulled the horses to a stop and climbed down with the same sharp efficiency as before. "What's going on here?" she demanded. "Mrs. Greer," the marshal said wearily, "this doesn't concern you." "Like hell it doesn't," Martha snapped. She walked right up to the deputy and stared him down despite being half his size. "You planning to arrest a woman for the crimes of her dead husband?" "We just want to question her," the deputy said. "Question her here then," Martha said. "Or better yet, question me. I've known this girl for weeks now. She doesn't know a damn thing about that gang." "How would you know?" the deputy challenged. "Because I've spent time with her," Martha said. "She's been trying to survive and raise her baby. That's all. Now, unless you have actual evidence of a crime, you leave her alone." The deputy looked at the marshal, uncertain. The marshal studied Mara for a long moment, then sighed. "Do you know where your husband's gang is hiding?" "No," Mara said. "Do you know who's leading them now?" "No." "Did you ever help them commit crimes?" "No," Mara said firmly. "I didn't even know what my husband was doing until it was too late." The marshal looked at her for another long moment, then nodded. "All right, I believe you." "Marshal," the deputy protested. "She doesn't know anything," the marshal said. "And even if she did, dragging her in for questioning won't help us catch that gang. It'll just waste time and resources." He turned back to Mara. "You hear anything, see anything suspicious, you let me know. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Mara said. The marshal tipped his hat to Martha, then to Jonah, and mounted his horse. The deputy followed reluctantly, shooting one last suspicious look at Mara before riding away. No one moved until the riders disappeared over the horizon. Then Mara's legs gave out. Jonah caught her before she hit the ground, pulling her against his chest. She clung to him, shaking violently, while Martha watched with sharp, knowing eyes. "That deputy's going to be trouble," Martha said. "He didn't believe a word of it." "I know," Jonah said grimly. "You need to make this official," Martha continued. "Marry her. Give her your name. Give that baby legal protection. Otherwise they'll keep coming back." Mara pulled away from Jonah, staring at Martha in shock. "What?" "You heard me," Martha said. "A married woman has more rights than a widow. And Jonah's name carries weight in this county. They won't touch you if you're Mrs. Carver." "That's insane," Mara said. "That's survival," Martha countered. She looked at Jonah. "You want to protect her? Truly protect her? Then make it legal." Jonah's expression was unreadable. "Martha." "Think about it," Martha interrupted. She climbed back into her wagon. "But don't think too long. That deputy looked like a man with a grudge. He'll be back." She drove away, leaving Jonah and Mara standing in the yard, both of them stunned into silence. Finally, Mara found her voice. "You don't have to. I would never ask you to." "I know," Jonah said quietly. "It's too much." "Maybe." "I'm not Anna," Mara said desperately. "I could never—" "I know that too," Jonah interrupted. He turned to face her fully, his eyes dark and serious. "But Martha's right. If you're my wife, they can't touch you. They can't take Eli. They can't run you off." "Is that the only reason?" Mara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jonah was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch infinitely gentle. "No," he said hoarsely. "It's not." Mara's breath caught. "Then what—" From inside the house, Eli started to cry. Not a distressed cry, just a wake-up fussing. The spell broke. "We should talk about this later," Jonah said, stepping back. "When we've both had time to think." Mara nodded, not trusting her voice. But that night, as she lay in bed with Eli sleeping peacefully beside her, she couldn't stop replaying Jonah's words. It's not the only reason. What did that mean? And more importantly, what did she want it to mean? 3 days passed, and neither of them mentioned Martha's suggestion. They moved around each other carefully, politely, like strangers sharing a stagecoach who were determined not to touch. Jonah spent long hours working outside, fixing things that didn't need fixing, riding the property line over and over. Mara threw herself into cleaning, cooking, caring for Eli with an intensity that left her exhausted by nightfall. But the silence was louder than any conversation could have been. On the 4th morning, Mara woke to find Jonah already gone and a note on the table written in his careful, blocky script. "Riding to town. Back by evening." She crumpled the note in her fist, fighting down the panic that immediately rose in her chest. He was leaving. He'd decided it was too much, too complicated, too painful to have her here. He was going to town to arrange for her to go somewhere else, somewhere safe, somewhere far away from him. She spent the day packing her few belongings with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face while Eli watched her with worried eyes. When Jonah finally returned just as the sun was setting, Mara was sitting at the table with her packed bundle beside her, trying to figure out how to say goodbye. Jonah stopped in the doorway, staring at the bundle, his face going pale. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I thought—" Mara's voice cracked. "I thought you'd decided that it was time for us to go." Jonah crossed the room in 3 long strides and grabbed her shoulders, his grip almost painful in its intensity. "No," he said fiercely. "God, no. Is that what you thought?" "You left without saying anything," Mara said. "You've barely looked at me in days. What else was I supposed to think?" Jonah released her and stepped back, running his hands through his hair in frustration. I went to town to see the preacher. Mara's breath stopped. What? Jonah reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a simple silver ring, tarnished and worn, but unmistakably a wedding band. It was my mother's, he said quietly. Only thing I have left of her. I had the jeweler clean it up, make sure it would fit. He looked up at Mara, his eyes raw and vulnerable. I wasn't running away. I was trying to do this right. Mara stared at the ring, then at Jonah, her mind reeling. You want to marry me? If you'll have me, Jonah said. His hands were shaking. I know it's not. I'm not offering you romance or poetry or any of the things a woman deserves. I can't promise I won't still grieve for Anna and Samuel. I can't promise I'll be easy to live with. He took a breath, steadying himself. But I can promise that I'll protect you and Eli with everything I have. I can promise you'll always have a home here. And I can promise that when I look at you, I don't just see someone I'm obligated to help. I see someone I... He stopped, struggling with the words. Someone I care about, he finished hoarsely. More than I thought I could care about anyone again. Mara's vision blurred with tears. Jonah, you don't have to answer now, Jonah said quickly. Take time, think about it. I just wanted you to know that the option is there if you want it. No pressure, no expectations. He set the ring on the table between them and turned to leave. Wait, Mara said. Jonah stopped, his back still to her. Mara stood, her legs unsteady, and picked up the ring. It was warm from his pocket, smooth and solid in her palm. I thought my life was over when they ran me out of town, she said quietly. I thought the best I could hope for was to survive long enough to get Eli somewhere safe. I never imagined I'd find a home. I never imagined I'd find someone who'd look at me and see something other than an outlaw's whore. She moved around to face him and saw tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. You gave me that, she said. You gave me hope. You gave me a reason to believe I could be more than what they said I was. She held up the ring. So yes, I'll marry you. Jonah's breath left him in a rush. You're sure? I'm terrified, Mara admitted, but I'm sure. Jonah reached out and took the ring from her, then gently lifted her left hand. His fingers trembled as he slid the band onto her ring finger. It fit perfectly. They stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, the ring catching the firelight between them. Then Jonah pulled her into his arms and held her like she was the only solid thing left in the world. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. Mara pressed her face into his chest and let herself cry, not from sadness or fear, but from overwhelming relief. She was home, truly home, and she wasn't going to lose it. From his cradle, Eli made a happy gurgling sound, and they both laughed through their tears. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in Martha Greer's parlor. The old woman had insisted on hosting, declaring that a proper wedding needed witnesses, and that she'd be damned if she let them sneak off to the preacher's office like they had something to be ashamed of. So Mara found herself standing in a borrowed dress, one of Martha's own from her younger days, taken in at the waist and let out at the bust, holding a small bouquet of prairie flowers, while Jonah stood beside her in his cleanest shirt and a tie that Martha's granddaughter had helped him wrestle into submission. The preacher was kind, his words simple and sincere. Martha and her granddaughter Sarah stood as witnesses, along with 2 of Martha's neighbors who'd been sworn to discretion about the bride's past. When the preacher asked if they took each other as husband and wife, both Jonah and Mara answered with steady voices. Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife, the preacher said. You may kiss the bride. Jonah hesitated, his eyes meeting Mara's with uncertainty. She reached up and touched his face gently. It's all right, she whispered. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, soft, careful, achingly tender. It was nothing like her first wedding, where Jack Lindell had grabbed her roughly and claimed her like property in front of his jeering friends. This kiss was a promise, a beginning, a choice they were both making freely. When they pulled apart, Martha was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, and Sarah was grinning widely. Well, Martha said briskly, that's settled. Now let's eat. I made a cake. The celebration was small but genuine. They ate cake and drank tea, and Martha regaled them with stories about her own wedding 50 years ago. Eli sat in Jonah's lap, grabbing at everything within reach and making everyone laugh. As the sun began to set, Jonah and Mara prepared to head home. Martha pulled Mara aside while Jonah was loading supplies into their wagon. "You did good, girl," Martha said quietly. "That man needed someone to give him a reason to live again, and you needed someone to give you a place to belong." "Thank you," Mara said, "for everything, for believing me, for helping us." Martha waved a dismissive hand. "Just don't waste it. You've got a second chance here, both of you. Don't let fear or pride or old ghosts keep you from being happy." "I won't," Mara promised. Martha nodded, satisfied, then handed her a wrapped package. "Wedding present. Don't open it until you get home." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet. Jonah drove with one hand on the reins and the other resting on the seat between them. After a few minutes, Mara slid her hand over his. He glanced at her, surprised, then smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes, and laced their fingers together. When they reached the house, Jonah helped Mara down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist longer than necessary. She looked up at him, her heart racing, and saw her own nervousness reflected in his eyes. "I'll put the horses up," Jonah said. "You go on inside. Get Eli settled." Mara nodded and carried the sleeping baby into the house. She tucked him into his cradle, then stood there for a moment trying to calm her racing thoughts. She was married to Jonah Carver, to a man who'd saved her life and shown her kindness and looked at her son with something close to love, a man who still grieved his first wife and child, a man who'd made it clear this marriage was partly for protection, partly for practicality. What did that mean for tonight? For sleeping arrangements? For the unspoken expectations that came with the word wife? Mara was still spiraling when Jonah came inside. He barred the door, hung up his coat, then stood there looking as uncertain as she felt. "Mara," he started. "About tonight, I don't expect anything," Mara said quickly. "I know this isn't... We're not..." "I'll sleep in the barn," Jonah said. Mara's stomach dropped with something that felt dangerously close to disappointment. "You don't have to do that." "I don't want you to feel pressured," Jonah said. "This marriage, it's legal, it's real, but it doesn't have to be anything more than that until you're ready. If you're ever ready." Mara studied him in the firelight, this good, broken, careful man who'd given her everything and asked for nothing in return. "What if I don't want you to sleep in the barn?" she asked quietly. Jonah's eyes widened. "Mara, I'm not saying..." She flushed. "I just mean you've been sleeping in that cold barn for months now because of me. You're my husband now. You should sleep in your own house, in your own bed." "There's only one bed," Jonah pointed out. "It's big enough for two," Mara said. We'll figure it out." Jonah looked at her for a long moment, something warm and grateful in his eyes. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Mara said. "We're married. We live together. We might as well sleep in the same house like normal people." Jonah's mouth twitched. When have we ever been normal people? Despite her nerves, Mara smiled. "Fair point." That night, after Eli was asleep and the fire was banked low, they prepared for bed with careful awkwardness. Mara changed into her nightgown in the bedroom while Jonah gave her privacy. Then she climbed into bed and pulled the quilts up to her chin while Jonah changed into clean long underwear in the main room. When he finally came to bed, he stayed on his side, leaving a careful distance between them. "Good night," he said quietly. "Good night," Mara replied. They lay there in the darkness, both rigid and hyper-aware of the other's presence. After several long minutes, Jonah spoke again. "Mara?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you're here." Mara's throat tightened. "Me too." Slowly, tentatively, she reached across the space between them until her fingers brushed his hand. Jonah caught her hand and held it gently. And that's how they fell asleep on their wedding night. Hands clasped in the darkness, a promise of something more waiting patiently for the right time. Spring turned to summer, and life on the ranch settled into a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Mara worked the garden while Eli played in a safe patch of shade nearby. Jonah tended the livestock and made repairs and gradually began accepting small jobs from neighboring ranchers who needed extra hands. The money wasn't much, but it was steady, and it helped ease the strain on their supplies. At night, they shared the bed with decreasing awkwardness, growing comfortable with each other's presence, each other's breathing, each other's warmth. Sometimes Mara would wake to find Jonah's arm draped over her waist. Sometimes Jonah would wake to find Mara curled against his side. Neither of them acknowledged it in the daylight, but neither of them pulled away either. Eli began pulling himself up on furniture, then taking wobbly steps while holding onto chair legs and table edges. The day he took his first independent steps, 3 shaky strides from the table to where Jonah was sitting by the fire, both adults erupted into cheers that startled the baby so much he sat down hard on his bottom and started crying. Jonah scooped him up, laughing, and tossed him gently in the air until Eli's cries turned to delighted giggles. "Did you see that?" Jonah said to Mara, his face lit up with joy. "Did you see him walk?" "I saw," Mara said, her heart so full it hurt. "He's growing up so fast." "Too fast," Jonah agreed. He settled Eli on his hip, and the baby immediately grabbed for his beard. "Pretty soon he'll be running all over the place getting into trouble." "Just like Samuel did," Mara said gently. Jonah's smile faltered for just a moment, then steadied. "Yeah, just like Samuel." That night after Eli was asleep, Jonah sat at the table with his whittling knife and a piece of wood. Mara watched him work, his hands sure and careful, slowly revealing the shape of a small horse. "Is that for Eli?" she asked. "Thought he might like it," Jonah said. "He's always grabbing at things. Might as well give him something meant for grabbing." Mara moved to stand behind him, resting her hands on his shoulders. She felt him tense, then gradually relax into her touch. "You're a good father," she said quietly. Jonah's hands stilled. "I'm not—" "Yes, you are," Mara interrupted. "Maybe not by blood, but in every way that matters, you're his father. You feed him, protect him, play with him, teach him. You love him." Jonah set down the knife and twisted to look up at her. "Is that what you see when you look at us?" "It's what Eli sees," Mara said. "He looks for you when you're gone. He reaches for you when he's scared. Last week when he fell and scraped his knee, he cried for Pa before he cried for me." Jonah's eyes widened. "He said, 'Pa,'" Mara confirmed. "Clear as day. He's been saying it for a week now. I thought you'd noticed." Jonah stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He crossed to the cradle and looked down at the sleeping baby, his shoulders shaking. Mara followed and wrapped her arms around him from behind. "It's all right," she whispered. "It's all right to love him, to let yourself be his father." "What if something happens to him?" Jonah asked hoarsely. "What if I can't keep him safe?" "What if you can?" Mara countered. "What if you spend the next 20 years worrying about losing him and miss all the joy of watching him grow up?" Jonah turned in her arms and pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I don't know how to do this, how to be a father again without remembering—" "Samuel will always be your son," Mara said fiercely. "Nothing changes that, but Eli can be your son too. You have room in your heart for both of them." Jonah held her tighter, his breath shuddering against her neck. "What did I do to deserve you?" "You opened your door in a blizzard," Mara said simply. Everything else just followed. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the quiet cabin, while their son slept peacefully nearby. When they finally went to bed that night, Jonah pulled Mara close without hesitation, and she settled against his chest with a feeling of rightness that made her eyes sting with tears. "Mara?" Jonah whispered into the darkness. "Yeah?" "I love you." The words hung in the air like a gift. Mara lifted her head to look at him, barely able to make out his features in the darkness. "You love me?" "I didn't mean to," Jonah admitted. "I tried not to, but somewhere between you scrubbing my floors and standing your ground with bounty hunters and making this house feel like a home again, I fell in love with you." Mara's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too. I have for a while now. I was just too scared to say it." "Scared of what?" "Scared you'd think I was trying to replace Anna," Mara whispered. "Scared you'd feel obligated to love me back because we're married. Scared this whole thing was just about survival and protection and nothing more." Jonah cupped her face in his hands. "Anna was my first love. She'll always be part of me. But you're not replacing anyone. You're something new. Something I never expected to find again. He kissed her then, not careful or tentative like before, but deep and real, and full of everything they'd been holding back for months. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Mara whispered, "I'm not scared anymore." "Neither am I," Jonah said. And for the first time since they'd married, they fell asleep wrapped around each other. No careful distance, no holding back, just two people who'd found each other in the darkness and decided to hold on tight. The trouble came again in late July, but this time they were ready. Mara was the one who spotted the dust cloud on the horizon. 3 riders, maybe 4, moving fast toward the ranch. "Jonah," she called, already moving for the house. He was beside her in seconds, his rifle in hand. "Get Eli to the root cellar, now." Mara grabbed the baby and ran. She climbed down into the small space beneath the kitchen floor, pulling the false panel shut above her head. In the darkness, she held Eli close and waited, her revolver loaded and ready just in case. Above her, she heard boots on the floorboards, rough voices. Then Jonah, cold and hard. "You're trespassing. Turn around and ride out." "We're looking for Jack Lindell's widow," a man said. "Heard she's holed up here with you." "You heard wrong," Jonah said. "That's funny," the man continued, "because we also heard you got yourself married recently, to a woman with a baby, real sudden-like." "My wife's name is Mara Carver," Jonah said, "and she's got nothing to do with Jack Lindell or his gang." "Maybe," the man said. "Maybe not. Either way, we're taking her in." "Over my dead body," Jonah said flatly. The sound of guns cocking echoed through the floorboards. Mara's heart stopped. She wanted to climb up, to help, to fight beside him. But she had Eli to think about. She had to stay hidden, had to keep their son safe. "Last chance, Carver," the man said. "Hand her over or we'll burn this place to the ground and dig her out of the ashes." "You can try," Jonah said. The first shot cracked through the air, and Mara bit down hard on her lip to keep from screaming. Above her, chaos erupted. Gunfire, shouting, the crash of breaking furniture. She heard Jonah return fire, heard someone cry out in pain. Then silence. Terrible, suffocating silence. Mara waited, her heart hammering, her revolver raised toward the panel above her head. Footsteps. Slow, heavy. "Mara," Jonah's voice called. "It's over. You can come up." She nearly sobbed with relief. She climbed up carefully, pushing the panel aside, and found Jonah standing in the middle of the destroyed cabin, bleeding from a gash on his temple, but alive. 3 men lay dead on the floor. "Are you hurt?" Mara asked, setting Eli down carefully and rushing to Jonah's side. "Just a graze," Jonah said. He swayed slightly and Mara caught him, guiding him to a chair. She cleaned and bandaged his wound with shaking hands, while Eli crawled over to pat Jonah's leg, babbling, "Pa, pa, pa," in concern. Jonah reached down and ruffled the baby's hair. "I'm all right, little man." Mara finished the bandage and sat back, looking at the bodies, at the destroyed cabin, at her husband's tired, blood-stained face. "When does it end?" she whispered. "When do we get to just live without looking over our shoulders?" "When we make it end," Jonah said. He stood, wincing, and crossed to where one of the dead men had dropped a satchel. He rifled through it and pulled out a stack of wanted posters. Mara's face stared back from the yellowed paper. Wanted for questioning. $50 reward. Jonah gathered all the posters and threw them into the fireplace, watching them burn. "These are the last ones," he said. "I made sure of it. Had the marshal spread word that you were dead. Died in childbirth, buried on my property. No more bounty. No more reason for anyone to come looking." Mara stared at him. "When did you do that?" "Couple weeks ago," Jonah admitted. "I went to town, paid the marshal to make it official in the records. As far as the territory is concerned, Mara Lindell is dead. Only Mara Carver exists now." Tears streamed down Mara's face. "You did that for me?" "For us," Jonah corrected. He pulled her into his arms, careful of his injured head. "For our family. So we could stop running, stop hiding, stop waiting for the next threat." "And these men?" Mara asked, gesturing to the bodies. "Last of Lindell's gang," Jonah said. "Marshall's been tracking them for months. They came here for revenge, not bounty." He met her eyes. "But they're dead now." and with them dies the last connection to your past. Mara pressed her face against his chest and cried, not from fear or grief, but from overwhelming relief. It was over, truly over. They buried the bodies far from the house, just like before. Then they spent the next week cleaning and repairing the cabin, putting their home back together piece by piece. When Martha rode out to check on them, she took one look at the fresh repairs and the determined set of their faces and nodded approvingly. "Good," she said. "You fought for it. Now you can keep it." And they did. Summer faded into autumn, and autumn into winter. The ranch thrived under their combined care. Mara's garden produced enough vegetables to last through the cold months. Jonah's cattle multiplied, and Eli grew strong and healthy, running everywhere on sturdy toddler legs. On Eli's first birthday, they had a small celebration. Martha came with Sarah and brought a cake. They sang and laughed and watched Eli demolish his slice with gleeful abandon, getting more frosting on his face than in his mouth. That evening, after Martha had gone and Eli was asleep, Jonah took Mara's hand and led her outside to the cottonwood tree where Anna and Samuel rested. "I wanted to come here," he said quietly, "to tell them about today." Mara squeezed his hand, understanding. Jonah crouched down beside the graves. "Anna, Samuel, I want you to meet someone. Well, you've met before, but—" He stopped, his voice catching. "Mara's my wife now. And that little boy sleeping in the house, that's Eli. He's not mine by blood, but he's mine in every other way." He wiped his eyes roughly. "I love them, both of them. And I know that doesn't mean I loved you any less. You'll always be part of me. Always." He stood and put his arm around Mara's shoulders. "But I'm living again, really living, and I wanted you to know that. Wanted to say thank you for the time we had, and goodbye. Not forever. Just for now." Mara leaned into him, her own tears falling silently. They stood there for a long time, the winter wind soft around them, the stars bright overhead. Finally, Jonah took a deep breath and turned toward the house. "Come on, it's cold. Let's go home." Home. Mara looked at the warm lights glowing in the cabin windows, at the smoke rising from the chimney, at the small boots lined up beside the door, hers, Jonah's, and Eli's, all in a row. "Yeah," she said softly. "Let's go home." Spring came again, bringing with it new life and new hope. One morning, Mara woke feeling sick to her stomach. She made it outside just in time, retching into the bushes while Jonah hovered anxiously nearby. "Should I get Martha?" he asked. "Are you all right?" Mara straightened, wiping her mouth, a strange mixture of fear and joy blooming in her chest. "I'm fine," she said. "I'm better than fine. Jonah, I think I'm pregnant." Jonah went very still. Are you sure?" "Not completely," Mara admitted, "but all the signs are there, and it would make sense. We've been—" She flushed. "It's been a few months now since—" Jonah caught her in his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her in a circle. When he set her down, his eyes were shining with tears. "We're going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "Are you happy?" Mara asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy?" Jonah laughed. That full, free laugh she'd come to love. "Mara, I'm terrified and thrilled and so damn happy I can barely breathe." He kissed her deeply, then dropped to his knees and pressed his face against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there?" he whispered. "I'm your pa, and I promise I'm going to do everything I can to keep you safe, to love you, to be the father you deserve." Mara ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. From inside the house, Eli called out, "Mama, Pa, hungry!" They both laughed, and Jonah stood, taking Mara's hand. "Come on," he said. "Let's go feed our son and tell him he's going to be a big brother." As they walked toward the house together, Mara paused and looked back at the cottonwood tree one last time. She couldn't be sure, but she thought she felt something, a warmth, a blessing, a whisper of approval on the spring breeze. Anna and Samuel would always be part of this place, part of Jonah, part of the foundation on which this new family was being built. But there was room for more love now, room for new memories, room for a future that honored the past without being imprisoned by it. Mara squeezed Jonah's hand, and they walked inside together. 2 years later, on a bright summer morning, Jonah stood in the doorway of their home, and watched his family with a contentment he'd never thought he'd feel again. Mara sat in the garden with their daughter, Sarah Anna Carver, named for Jonah's mother and his first wife, cradled in her arms. Beside them, Eli chased butterflies with the determined focus of a 4-year-old who believed he could catch anything if he just tried hard enough. The ranch had grown. They'd expanded the garden, built a proper chicken coop, added another room to the house. Martha visited regularly, and a few of the neighboring families had started treating Mara with genuine kindness rather than suspicious tolerance. Life was good. Hard sometimes. Exhausting, often. But good. Eli spotted Jonah in the doorway and came running, his small face lit up with joy. "Pa, Pa, come see. I found a frog." Jonah scooped him up, examining the small creature cupped carefully in Eli's muddy hands. "That's a good-looking frog, son. Can we keep him?" "Frogs need to live in the creek," Jonah explained, "but we can visit him there whenever you want." Eli considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Okay, but I get to name him first." "What are you going to name him?" "Samuel," Eli said without hesitation. "That's a good name. You told me that's what your first little boy was called, so this can be Samuel Frog." Jonah's throat tightened. He looked over at Mara, who was watching them with tears in her eyes and a soft smile on her lips. "Yeah," Jonah said, his voice rough. "Samuel Frog. That's perfect." He carried Eli down to the creek, where they gently released the frog back into the water. They watched it hop away into the reeds, and Eli waved solemnly. "Bye, Samuel Frog," he called. "We'll come visit you." As they walked back to the house, Eli slipped his small hand into Jonah's larger one. "Pa?" he asked. "Yeah, son?" "I'm glad you're my pa." Jonah stopped walking and crouched down to Eli's level, looking the boy straight in his bright, trusting eyes. "I'm glad I'm your pa, too," he said. "You and your mama and your sister, you're the best things that ever happened to me." "Even better than pancakes?" Eli asked seriously. Jonah laughed and ruffled his hair. "Even better than pancakes." Eli grinned and threw his arms around Jonah's neck, and Jonah held him close, breathing in the scent of dirt and sunshine and little boy. When they reached the house, Mara was standing now, baby Sarah awake and gurgling happily in her arms. She smiled at Jonah over their daughter's head, and he felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it was almost painful. This was his family, his home, his second chance at a life he'd thought was lost forever. And he would spend every day for the rest of his life being grateful for the night a desperate woman knocked on his door in a blizzard and trusted him with everything she had. That evening, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Jonah and Mara sat on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie. She leaned against him, his arm around her shoulders, and they breathed in the peace of another day, survived and savored. "Are you happy?" Mara asked softly. Jonah thought about that question, thought about all the grief he'd carried, all the pain he'd survived, all the years he'd spent just trying to make it through each day. Then he thought about Eli's laugh and Sarah's tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb and the way Mara looked at him like he'd hung the moon even though they both knew he was just a man doing his best. "Yeah," he said. "I'm happy. Are you?" Mara tilted her head to look up at him, her eyes shining in the fading light. "I'm home. That's better than happy. That's everything." Jonah kissed her forehead, then her temple, then her lips. "Then we did all right, didn't we? Scarred and broken as we were." "We did better than all right," Mara whispered. "We built something real, something that'll last." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, one by one, like promises written in light. Inside the house, 3 sets of boots stood lined up by the door, large, medium, and tiny. Outside, 2 graves rested peacefully beneath the cottonwood tree. And all around them, the prairie stretched endless and free, holding their small homestead in the palm of its vast hand. They'd come to this place running from different kinds of death, Jonah from grief, Mara from violence. And somehow, in the midst of blizzards and gunfights, and all the ways the world tried to break them, they'd found each other. They'd found a door in the darkness, and they'd walked through it together into light. The story of Jonah and Mara Carver didn't end that night on the porch, because lives don't end. They just keep unfolding, day by ordinary day, into something bigger than any single moment could contain. But if anyone had asked them years later about the night their story truly began, they would both point to the same moment. A frozen woman with a dying baby standing in a blizzard, whispering the only truth she had left. "We got nowhere to go, sir," and a grieving man with nothing left to lose opening the door and saying the only thing that mattered. "Then you belong here." Because sometimes the most extraordinary love stories don't start with passion or romance or grand declarations. Sometimes they start with mercy, with a door opened against the cold, with two broken people choosing to believe that belonging is possible even when the world says otherwise. And sometimes, if they're very lucky and very brave, those stories end with a family sitting on a porch under the stars, finally at peace in the home they built from nothing but hope and stubborn, enduring love.